Welcome to NAIS Member Voices. I'm Scott Donaldson, Member Engagement Director at the National Association of Independent Schools. This month, NAIS content editor Luna Greenstein speaks with Jessica Bremmer, English Department Chair and Upper School English teacher at Westridge School in Pasadena, California. In their conversation, Jessica shares how her background in English and passion for storytelling shape her leadership and commitment to amplifying student voices. She discusses creating spaces where students feel heard and empowered, supporting faculty in times of change, and fostering trust across the community. Jessica also reflects on her journey from the classroom to leadership, the importance of modeling vulnerability and reflection, and how independent schools can nurture belonging while embracing challenge and growth. I'll turn it over to Luna.
Thank you, Scott, and welcome, Jessica. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Great. Well, I'm going to dive into our first question, which is just to ask you about your role as the English department chair and upper school English teacher, and if you always saw yourself in this role and where you've been that helped you get to this role and today.
So I think I'll start at the end of your questions and work my way back. So no, I definitely did not always see myself in this role. My path to education was not straightforward and a little windy, and I didn't really know or envision that I would end up as a teacher, a high school teacher, teaching English, or that I would be an English department chair. And so there were a lot of really amazing kind of pivots in my life that brought me to this place. And I'm really thankful that I get to be department chair. I think it's a really remarkable and kind of amazing opportunity to impact the daily experience of our students at Westridge and the experience of our teachers at Westridge. And so in terms of my role as department chair, I think this probably differs from school to school, but in terms of how I understand it here at Westridge and what I value most about it is I see myself as really an advocate for my department and for the teachers in my department and for the mission of my department. And so our department is grades 4 through 12. So we have lower, middle, and upper school teachers in our department. There's a total of 12 of us. And I do everything from visiting, teacher classes across divisions to just kind of get a sense of what's happening at each, level within our program. I'm part of evaluations for new teachers. I participate in the hiring of new English teachers. I run our department meetings. And bigger picture wise, I guide our discussions about the initiatives and the values and the things that are really important to our department and how those can function within the broader scope of the school. And so I think in that way, I'm really, again, an advocate for what the members of my department think is really crucial and essential for how we want to teach kids how to be critical readers and thinkers. And I think that's the part that I find so rewarding.
That's amazing. I'm just curious, is there anything that you turn to for inspiration as you are advocating and working with your department to make the best educational experience for the kids?
Always our students, truthfully. And so I really always try to keep at the forefront of any conversations I'm in or any decisions I get to be a part of, how is this best serving students? And so I think I'm always looking to students for that inspiration. And then I really work with some remarkable, brilliant teachers. I can't say enough about the teachers at our school and in my department. And so it's a very collaborative community in that way. And so I'm always looking to teachers, both in our department and outside of our department, for inspiration and to help, guide me and keep me aligned with our mission and keep in mind, how what we're doing helps serve our school community and then also, our students more specifically.
Great. And what would you say is your biggest challenge? Like, what keeps you up at night?
Oh gosh. Um I hate to say AI, but I think I'm going to say AI right now. As a humanities teacher, I think we are faced with a specific set of challenges when it comes to helping students navigate this new technology and helping them understand when it's appropriate to use, when it's not appropriate to use, trying to figure out how we can be responsive in our classroom strategies and classroom practices and to be realistic about the fact that students are using this. And so that's a big challenge. And I would say as an English teacher and as a department chair of an English department, I am very, very concerned. And I think one of our great academic challenges right now is actually the proliferation of book bans and, the limiting of access to literary texts. I think this has reached really crisis level at this point. And so this is something that I think about a lot, I worry about a lot, and I grapple with a lot in terms of how to address this within our school community.
Right, and that is something I wanted to talk to you about today because I know that's something you've taken a personal or not a personal, but a professional kind of stand to create a banned books class at your school. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. So a few years ago, we were given the opportunity to design some advanced English courses. And I had been thinking about a banned books class for years. And when that opportunity arose, it was just this, it felt really topical, but also really urgent at this point in time to engage students in these conversations. So I designed a banned books and censorship class. It's a class that our senior English students can opt into as one of their, final courses, English courses here at Westridge. And it's been a really eye-opening, really rewarding experience for me as a teacher, and I hope for the students as well. I've really presented this class to students as an act of activism and as an act of resistance against academic censorship. And so that's how we have oriented the class, and that's how we engage in discussions about the text that I ask them to read and the conversations we have and the thinking that I ask them to do. It's been one of the most rewarding teaching experiences I've had in the 20 years I've been a teacher.
Wow. How is the class structured?
We begin at the beginning. So we start, our very first text is critique. It's a Puritan era critique of Puritan religion and government called New English Canaan by a writer named Thomas Morton. And then we kind of work our way through some earlier texts that have been banned or have created, moments of hardship for their authors. So we read parts of Leaves of Grass. We read some poetry that has been banned, and then we really spend the rest of the class reading novels. So for the times that I have taught the class so far, we've read 1984 and The Bluest Eye, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, Last Night at the Telegraph Club, and then Out of Darkness. And then students get to choose their final one or two texts for the year. So they have chosen A Clockwork Orange, The Outsiders, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Those are the ones that come to mind immediately. So, and then along the way, there's a lot of writing happening. This is also a class that aims to teach them about literary analysis. So we're still doing all of that. We're still practicing close reading. We're still practicing being critical thinkers. And we're just doing that, kind of through the lens of these banned or challenged texts. And this all leads up to students writing a final personal essay that is really their chance to create their own and articulate their own theory of academic censorship based on what we've read and the conversations we've had, both about the texts themselves and then just the cultural phenomena surrounding book banning right now.
And you mentioned earlier that it's been a recent rise in censorship. So, are a lot of these books newly censored or censored once again, or what is that landscape looking like?
So it's a bit of both. And so, for example, 1984 and The Bluest Eye, that's Toni Morrison. Those are not new books, but they continue to top banned books lists every year. And that's part of the reason why I chose them. And then Out of Darkness, The Last Night at the Telegraph Club, those are newer published books. And pretty quickly started to kind of climb to the top of banned or challenged lists upon their publication. So I really aimed in choosing the text to kind of show students, one, that this has been going on for hundreds of years, but that two, we are not immune to this right now. And so it is books that are being published right now in this moment that are as subject to these bans as are books that were published, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 100 years ago.
Have you run into any roadblocks in terms of teaching books that have been banned, let's say from other people at the school or parents or anything like that?
I have to say, I have been so lucky and I haven't. So, I had the full support of my administration when I proposed this course and really had an amazing amount of autonomy in terms of choosing my texts and deciding how I wanted to structure the class. I have had, quite the opposite from parents in terms of not even no pushback, but just really vocal support for what I'm trying to do in the class. And I've heard from a lot of parents who are happy that their daughters, at our school have the chance to be in a class that challenges them to think about these things. So there really hasn't been, at least not that I've been made aware of, pushback within the school or from outside of the school. And it's really been quite the opposite. It's really, been embraced and I think celebrated, which I recognize I'm really lucky to have had that experience with this kind of content.
Definitely. And it sounds like you've gotten some really positive feedback from the parents. I'm wondering, what has the feedback been from students?
Again, very positive. And I think I will preface this by saying, again, students self-select into this course. And so in some ways they might be primed to take in everything this class has to offer them. But I think by and large, I hear from students that they come out of this class understanding what they can do to push back against, this rise in censorship, and that it can be quiet things like reading these books and knowing them and talking about them and not letting them be forgotten. And, all the way up to, I've had students organize book drives so that, just in the name of literary access, and students have volunteered to go speak to our lower school students in their English classes about what it means to, have access to literature restricted. And so the experience has been really eye-opening for me in the sense that students have kind of just made the class their own and really taken the lead in a lot of ways. And students have said to me on a number of occasions that it's just been, in addition to really enjoying what we're reading, really important for them and kind of beginning to understand or develop or discover their academic voices and their intellectual voices and how those can extend outside of the classroom.
That's wonderful. Do you have any plans for the future of the class?
So I hope to continue teaching it. It kind of cycled out of our offerings this year. I'm hoping it will cycle back into our offerings next year. And I would like to see it grow, certainly in terms of, maybe becoming a class that isn't just for seniors, but maybe, juniors and seniors could take this class together. Organizing some events. I would, we always do something for Banned Books Week at our school through my class. And so I think expanding what our efforts are in that way across the school community, I definitely see that happening in the future as well. And then I would really love to give students a chance to have a little more say in what the next year's class could look like for the students coming after them. And, I think they probably have some pretty awesome ideas, truthfully, about how this class could grow and be different. And because I have it framed in my head a certain way, but they might have it framed in their heads a certain way. And I'd love to have those discussions too, so that there's a little more student input beyond just the last one or two texts for the year.
That makes sense. I'm just curious if you were one of the students giving student input, which would be your 1 or 2 texts that you would pick for, the end of the year? What are your, like, top books that you love to teach in this class?
So I love teaching The Bluest Eye. It is one of the most challenging texts for me as a teacher that I've ever taught. And it's one of the most challenging texts I think that a lot of students will read in their time here. But there's so much there just in terms of the richness of Toni Morrison's writing. So that on its own, I think is really important. And then also the fact that this book continues, it was published in the 50 years ago, right? And 40 years ago, any of these books, and it continues to upset and disrupt and, challenge ideals about what is acceptable for students to read. And I think it's so important for that reason too. So 1980, sorry, The Bluest Eye would definitely be top on my list from the books that we have in the course now. And really, almost all of Toni Morrison's books have been banned or challenged at this point. So I think I would choose really any of her texts, but The Bluest Eye, because it's her first published novel, is really, I think, an important moment for us in this class.
What kind of themes are you exploring in these texts as you're reading them with the students?
So it really depends on the text, although I would say there's certainly some threads that emerge because so many books that are being targeted right now are those by writers of color or those that, represent or express the experience of LGBTQ plus students and young people and adults. And so certainly themes of gender and racial and cultural identity, racism. We talk a lot about the act of writing and authorship in relation to these texts as well. And then the kind of historical context that surrounds or creates the circumstances in which these texts have been banned or kind of deemed dangerous. And so that's a lot of what we talk about in this class in terms of themes. And then we do have broader discussions just about what it means for something to be banned or challenged and what that looks like, in terms of a school district or a library, and then what the impact is of that on the writer themselves. And we've been really fortunate so last year we had a writer whose book has been banned pretty frequently. And she came, she spoke with my class via Zoom and really was able to talk about what that feels like to have this thing that you've really poured your heart and soul into be deemed harmful. And she really challenged students to think about the fact that it isn't always a badge of honor, but it can be really heartbreaking for people who write these stories to learn that they're being suppressed. And so these are all, running conversations throughout the course of the class.
What kind of impact do you think it has on the students to have the opportunity to not only be able to read these books, but to have kind of a safe space to discuss them at school and a structured class around it to really delve into these themes?
I mean, it feels really vital to me. And I hope that that is the experience that they walk away with, is that this is a safe way to read these things and think about these things. And I hope that students, and I always say this to them at the outside of the class, at the outset of the class, and then we talk about this throughout the year, is that the reason these books are banned is because they create discomfort. And that's the exact reason we should be reading them. And so I really challenge students to think about the difference between feeling unsafe and feeling uncomfortable. And that, being unsafe in class is never okay, but it is okay to be uncomfortable. And that sometimes some really productive things and some amazing thinking can happen when we just kind of sit with that discomfort a little bit. And so I hope that students walk away from this course, one, understanding that yes, we can have a non-judgmental space to safely read and share and, offer our perspectives about this issue and these texts, but that also students are being pushed to understand that the goal is not to alleviate their discomfort about what they're reading, but instead to ask them how to navigate that and build something from that and gain meaning from that. And so I hope that's the experience that they have and one of the lessons they walk away with.
That's great. As a fellow reader, I really appreciate your willingness to help the students sit with that discomfort because I'm sure that can be uncomfortable for you as well as their teacher, but it's such an important skill. And like sometimes the books that make you feel the most uncomfortable are the books that stick with you and that you learn the most from and you gain those life lessons. So I agree. I think that's very impactful and it's a really interesting class. I love hearing about it and I hope, other educators listening to this are inspired and that kind of brings me to my next question, which is what advice would you give to other educators interested in starting a similar type of class?
I think that probably depends on the school in which they are trying to launch this. But I think the best advice I could give is just to have a very clear sense for why you're wanting to teach this class. I had to kind of lead with that. So I didn't just want to do a banned books class because I thought it would be popular or, this would kind of speak to some rebellious side of the students. But it really just felt so pressing to me as an educator that we have these conversations in a classroom. And so I started with there. I started with my purpose. And I think that that is what allowed me to clearly articulate to my administration, this is why I want to teach this class and teach it now. And this is why I think you should let me. And so I guess my best piece of advice would be just to really have a clear sense of why this is important to you, to us as teachers and as individuals who are going to be stepping into these conversations with students. And I think because I was able to hold on to that idea throughout this process, it really helped me. Again, I didn't come up against any pushback, so I didn't really have to justify the class, but it just helped me articulate for myself and for our admin, and then certainly for the students, why I wanted to teach this class. And so I think if I have some advice to give, that would probably be it.
Sounds like solid advice, if you ask me. Well, I also wanted to hear a little bit more about, your work as an educator generally. And so I guess to kick off that part of the conversation, is there anything in particular that you are most proud of?
A few things definitely that come to mind. So, in terms of my work here at Westridge, so Westridge is the only independent school I've taught at. I taught college prior to teaching here. And so, as I think about my time here, there are a couple of things that really jump to mind. One is the banned books class we just talked about. I'm incredibly proud of what we've been able to accomplish with that. In addition to that, there are a few things that I've been able to help create with, by collaborating with other teachers. So we have a student led academic conference that another teacher and I created. It's going to be in its 14th year now. And it's really a chance we really wanted to give students a chance to share the work they were doing in their English classes beyond just handing it in to their teacher. And so we created this academic conference and we didn't really know where it was going to go or what it was going to look like. And there have been many iterations of it in the last 14 years, but it has turned into really kind of a staple on our school calendar. And we have students participate from lower school, middle school, and upper school. And it's interdisciplinary. So that's something I'm really proud to have been a part of. And kind of tied to the conference is the same teacher and I. She's another English teacher, a colleague of mine in the department. We also designed a literature based interdisciplinary course, English class. So it's for juniors and seniors. And so it's always based in the literature we want to teach. But then teachers from other departments come in and might be a guest speaker for one class, or they might take a whole month of class and, teach something, say, from the perspective of being a theater teacher or being an art teacher. I'm really proud of that course too, and how it's kind of taken root in our school and in our curriculum.
So the teachers that you bring into the class, they're kind of guest teaching or what does that look like?
It kind of depends. So sometimes they are guest teaching. And so I, in those moments, or whoever's teaching the class, whatever English teacher is teaching the class, gets to kind of just sit and be a student in those moments, which is really awesome. And then sometimes we're teaching together. And so we're working together to offer, multiple perspectives about the same text, for example. And so we'll be working together to kind of give students different ways into what we're reading. So it really just kind of depends on what the other teacher is interested in doing and what the topic of the class is, which changes from year to year.
Do you have any recent examples of something another teacher came in and taught something that they were passionate about to the students?
Absolutely. So I last taught this class a couple of years ago, and that class was about disruption. That was the topic of the class. And so we had teachers from the art department, the theater department, and the history department who all came in at various moments during the course of the year to teach some things. And the director of theater here and a theater teacher, he came in and spent, I'm trying to think, probably about a month in first semester and then maybe a couple of weeks in second semester looking at a series of plays that their whole purpose was really to disrupt kind of what it meant to sit and be an audience in watching a performance. And then he also, when he came later in the school year, he was in the process of, staging our musical at school. And he enlisted the students in this course to help him think about what the script might look like, how to navigate the gendered ideas in this musical that, would be potentially problematic. And so he really invited them to kind of be hands-on in that way too. And so they just got this amazing like deep dive into some theater work at 2 points in the year. And they all of them honestly reported, at the end of the class that was maybe one of their favorite parts of the course. And so that's one that comes to mind definitely as I'm thinking about when I got to teach this class.
That's awesome. I wonder if the theater class got a few more participants or the theater club after that class.
I hope so. I certainly hope so. So they were very, very invested and very engaged. So hopefully, I don't know. Actually, I should ask him.
Well, it sounds like you've done a lot of different kind of designed classes in your years of teaching. So I'm just wondering what inspires you to come up with an idea for a class before you come and bring it to the school?
I honestly, I keep a running list of classes I'd like to teach. I've done that for years. And so I do have just ideas that come to me that I kind of just put down on a piece of paper so that if the opportunity arises, I can remind myself, like, oh, this was something I was thinking about, or some idea I had. So I always just have that list running in my head and on a notepad on my desk. But also, when there are specific needs within the school, then so for example, as I was mentioning with the band books class, we had the chance and were asked to design some advanced courses. And so that was a moment where I had the idea and it really kind of fit the need that we had, in our school and in our program at that moment. So sometimes it's also just these are the kind of institutional shifts we're thinking about making or the institutional needs we have. And what kind of course could I help design that would fit into that? But often, I find myself, I was actually looking at this list maybe a couple of weeks ago, and I tend to gear towards topics that are about things like disruption or pushing back or challenging dominant narratives or perspectives. And so that's where my brain goes when I think about how I want to engage with students in the classroom.
So kind of on a similar note, I'm just curious, as an English teacher, like what are you reading right now in your free time?
Gosh, some things I wouldn't admit to, I guess I'll say. And there are a couple of books that I have just finished or read, in the last maybe 6 or 8 months or so. So I recently read Martyr, which, is kind of making its way kind of around the world. It's just got this amazing reception because it's a really amazing text. And so we had a lot of teachers at Westridge reading it at the same time. And so we could, kind of stop and talk to each other about it, when we passed each other during the day. And so reading Martyr, I also, Percival Everett's James is one that really was just a remarkable piece of writing. And I am rereading The House of the Spirits right now. So I just started that again. And then I'm rereading The Bluest Eye, actually, just because it's been about a year since I read it. And so I have those two going right now. So nothing very light, but things that I've been really wanting to revisit and to think some more about.
James is on my list as well. So glad to hear it's English teacher approved.
It's definitely English teacher approved.
Well, I'm just curious. You said you've been a teacher for 20 years, a long time. What have been some of your most important lessons that you've learned?
It's a good question. I think a really important lesson I've learned throughout my time is just that I don't have to take myself so seriously in order for students to take the class seriously. So, when I first started teaching, I was pretty young. I was teaching college as part of my, graduate school experience. And so I wasn't much older than some of the people I was teaching, and I really felt like I had to kind of project the image of what a teacher teaching college was, whatever that is. And so I think I didn't let myself just kind of be a little silly sometimes, or to laugh with students, or because I felt I definitely had some imposter syndrome going on when I started, and so I definitely have learned that there is room for like a lightness in the classroom, and moments of silliness and moments of laughter, and that doesn't detract from the student's experience or from what my dynamic with them will be. So that's been a huge lesson that I've learned with time. The other thing that I think really comes to mind when you ask me that is just my shift in understanding about what students are capable of, and like the credit we need to give students for being able to understand nuance and complexities, and being able to handle challenging material and have difficult conversations in the classroom. And I didn't know what to expect when I started teaching upper school. It's the first time I taught students of that age, and so I think I learned that lesson again every year when I sit in a classroom, and a student will say something, and I'm just like, yeah, they're really thinking about this, and they can do this, right? And it's like I know they have the capability, but it's just those moments of like when it's articulated so directly for me, it's just always a learning moment for me every time that happens. So those are really the two things that I think of immediately when you ask that question.
Those are great. When did you make the switch from teaching college to teaching upper school?
So it's been 15 years. This is my 15th year at Westridge. And so I made that switch when I came to teach at Westridge. So I was finishing my PhD and was teaching, freshman composition as part of that, college freshmen, and was getting ready to go on the job market, and really, trying to find a tenure track job at a university. I really wanted to be teaching at a research university. That was the plan I had for myself. And a lot of things happened in my life, and kind of conversations happened with people that I really respected and who really inspired me. And I started thinking about independent schools. And so Westridge was one of the first schools I interviewed with. And, I started teaching here, and I kind of haven't looked back since then. So it's been 15 years.
Was it an adjustment to go from or like a big adjustment to go from teaching college to teaching upper school?
In some ways it was, but I think probably not in the ways that people would expect. And so it was not a jump in terms of the things students were capable of. So I went from teaching again, writing, freshman writing at college, to getting to teach literature courses. And I was so surprised and kind of amazed at how able the students were to that my upper school students were to be able to just have high level conversations about the text we were reading. And so that part wasn't a shift. What was a shift or a surprise, and a really positive one, is how much better I got to know my students, because I was in smaller classes. I got to have them for an entire year as opposed for a semester. And getting to develop those relationships with students was such a pleasant surprise for me, because that's not how things were when I was teaching college. Students were taking this required general ed class for me, and I didn't really get a chance to engage with them outside of class. And I was teaching big classes in terms of the numbers. And so a really, really pleasant shift. was just the engagement I got to have with students when I got to Westridge. It's been one of my favorite things about teaching in an independent school and teaching at this school.
Is that one of the main things also that kept you going teaching at Westridge and staying in that track versus, like you said, trying to go back to your original plan?
It was definitely, and I've had some opportunities to throughout my time here to potentially step back into the college world. And when I really sat down and thought about it, I knew I would miss that part of my daily experience, of being a teacher. And so it definitely has been one of the things that has kept me really rooted here and, continuing to be here every day.
That's wonderful. Love hearing that from teachers because, I think everyone who works in education knows that it's a challenging job, but can be the most rewarding as well.
I'm really so inspired and feel incredibly lucky to be part of this faculty at Westridge. These are some of the most devoted and caring and thoughtful, brilliant people I've had a chance to work with. And so that really keeps me going here too. I really do feel like we are an intellectual community. And so that really feels different than when I was teaching college too, where it's kind of, you kind of come and go and you teach your class and you leave and, and you don't really even get to know your colleagues that well. And so that's very different, than what I've experienced while I've been here at Westridge. And that also keeps me here very definitely.
I'd love to, yeah, to hear more about your colleagues and specifically if you've had a mentor or mentors in your time at Westridge and how that's impacted your educational journey.
Absolutely. So I've had the luck of having several mentors throughout, my professional life. And one in particular at Westridge was the division director, the upper school division director who hired me to teach at Westridge. And she is someone who really to me kind of embodies what it means to be a leader. So she was never just like a manager of people, but really a leader, someone that I look to as a leader and someone who really pushed me to think about, doing some things outside of the classroom in terms of my own leadership possibilities and opportunities. And someone who just has always encouraged me to try new things and to take risks and has tried to put me together with the resources I need when I'm, trying to do something new. And I would say this woman was pretty integral in me taking on any sort of leadership roles at Westridge because I wasn't really thinking about that. And pretty early on in my time here, she started talking to me about thinking about what that could look like for me here. And so she's definitely someone who is a mentor and has inspired me in my time at Westridge.
Was there any piece of advice that really stuck with you as you've gone on in your teaching career?
A couple, I think, yes, now that I think about it. So, in a couple of moments in my life, I've had mentors, give me the advice that I should be open to my professional journey taking a different path than the one I thought it was going to take. And that has really served me well at a couple of key moments in my life and not something that I came to easily. So I very much had a plan for myself when I came out of grad school. I very much had a plan for myself when I got to Westridge and kind of what I thought my trajectory would be here. And I've had some mentors remind me that it's really important to just be open to some other possibilities. And that is something that has really, really stuck with me and I think has impacted my professional journey in really profound ways. So that's definitely a key piece of advice. Pretty early on in my time in Westridge, I got the piece of advice that I just needed to trust that I could be myself and that would be enough for my students. And that was really comforting and kind of freeing. So, because again, I was coming from this atmosphere where I felt like I needed to project a certain, kind of professorial image because of who I was teaching. And I was in some ways kind of like given permission to not have to do that here. And that was really, really freeing. And that has stuck with me too.
Sounds like a special type of freedom for someone to say, "You should you should be yourself and not feel like you have to project a certain image, and that the students will appreciate you for the wisdom you're trying to impart to them and not just for the image that you're portraying. So that sounds like a very good piece of advice.
Absolutely. Yes. And it's, it's what we ask of our students is just like bring your authentic selves to the classroom. And so it's really important that we can do that too, right? And so just getting that reminder when I was first starting to teach at this at this level was really important for me as I was starting out my time teaching an independent school and teaching upper school.
Is there anything else that you would want to share with the NIS community about your journey as an educator, or about any of your specific classes that you've talked about, or anything in general?
I think, yes, I think in terms of my own journey, I feel like I need to say, and I want to say just how fortuitous it has been, and again, I mentioned just there were some key kind of pivots that I had to be open to that got me to where I am. And so I didn't go to college right after high school. I was a really confused 17-year-old when I graduated. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I didn't go to college until after I was married. And I went to school to undergrad in Georgia, and I had this amazing Southern literature teacher who really, really early on in my time there, suggested I start thinking about graduate school and start thinking about being a teacher. And I had never considered that ever. So I went to grad school and, was getting my master's degree. And I had another teacher who suggested I think about getting my PhD. And, and then when I was finishing up my PhD, my dissertation mentor really was the one who suggested I start thinking about independent schools as opposed to try to find a tenure track job. I was watching my peers and my friends go on the job market, and they were, colleges and universities were not hiring tenure track. They were hiring adjunct professors for all sorts of reasons. And so I saw friends having to work at 4 different community colleges to kind of piece together a job for themselves. And I was also a new mom as I was finishing up my PhD. And so my priorities really shifted. And so again, my mentor was like, I think you should think about this other path. And so I just think that those moments really have taught me that I have to be open to those pivots, because I would never have ended up doing what I'm doing if I hadn't been open to those. So I think that's the other thing I'd like to share about my journey is just that the windy road has been pretty awesome actually. So
That's beautiful, and it's so true. Sometimes the universe has a little bit of a way of getting you on the path that you're supposed to be on, even if it's not necessarily the one you envisioned for yourself. So
absolutely. Yep. Yep. And just learning to recognize those moments for what they are and embracing them has been really important for me, for sure.
great. Well, Jessica, it has been such a delight speaking with you, and I have thoroughly enjoyed hearing about your journey and your passion and the work that you're doing with your students. So thank you so much for joining us, and it was great talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks for listening to NAIS Member Voices. You can find some related NAIS resources from this episode by visiting nais.org/member voices. You can also keep an eye on that page for information about past and upcoming episodes. Please be sure to subscribe to Member Voices wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. And go back and listen to previous episodes you might have missed. If you have feedback for us, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform to let us know how we're doing. You can also send us your thoughts and suggestions on what you'd like to hear on a future podcast by emailing membership@nais.org.